Welcome to Mr. Worley Edwards, our newest Dingman Award winner and the local Board of Education advisor to the State Board. Sir, we look forward to your service and engaging conversations with you over this year. And would you like to make a few comments?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to this opportunity, and I just hope to learn from all of you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Edwards. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. And if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Before we move to our committee meetings, let's pause briefly to consider that while this month is officially designated Black History Month, it's fitting that every month we should honor the many contributions to our nation and state by our fellow citizens of African descent. For African Americans in countless ways have built this nation, including its physical structure and its economic wealth. African Americans enriched every aspect of our culture, our music, dance, and across the arts, the food we enjoy and the language we speak. African Americans have enriched our religious life, elevated our dedication of sacrifice and service to others, and our commitment to live up to our nation's declaration that all are created equal, despite too often not being treated equally. And African Americans have for centuries been skilled educators, raising up our children in knowledge and in the determination to use that knowledge to create a better world for the next generation. I consider one of my greatest blessings as an American was to be educated by North Carolina public school teachers. And the one that stands out above the rest is my 5th grade teacher at Collinswood Elementary, Miss Queenie T. Bird, my first African American teacher. I discovered a whole new world in her classroom, a world that challenged some of my strongest beliefs of right and wrong, and to think more deeply then and every day since about my relationships, especially with African Americans who've had an American experience different from mine. Ms. Bird taught us that our collective experiences matter, that all experiences matter, the ones we celebrate and the ones that are painful to remember. We're a better nation and state because of our African American teachers like Ms. Bird and today's teachers who, despite the threats, continue her legacy of making this state a better place by challenging us to do better for all students. This is a cause that deserves our complete commitment and a legacy to celebrate together every day of every month throughout the year. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and had the opportunity to review it. During the day, we may need to make some slight changes to the order of our agenda. But notwithstanding that, I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. Hearing none, I request a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Kamnitz. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hall. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Yes, sir. Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. We have an agenda. Thank you. I note to our committee chairs and audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be completed tomorrow via roll call. We'll begin our day's work with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee chaired by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Good morning, everyone. I share the responsibility for the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. And it is our great pleasure to start our meeting today with some wonderful news. We have an update on the Governor's School, and Ms. Shaw Coltrane, with a big smile on her face, is going to share that with us.
Good morning, Board, Superintendent Truitt, Chairman Davis, and all those assembled. If I can quote Coach Davis from Carolina this past weekend, it's going to be a good day for Governor's School today. We are absolutely thrilled to be here with you today. I want to first give you a little bit of a background of Governor's School because some of you are newer to the board, and I just want to make sure we have a little bit of background. I first want to introduce to you our chair of our Governor's School Board of Directors, Michael Elder, who is from Onslow County. So you all have an official board of directors, and Michael Elder is our chair. And so thank you for letting me have him here today. So Governor's School is, Deanna, if you don't mind when you get a chance, one of just the gems of our state, and is, some will say, representative of what education should be for all students at all times. So we are a multi-week summer residential program for approximately 700 students. We, of course, aim to serve more. We have 1,733 applications downstairs right now, starting to be reviewed from across our school districts, private schools and charter schools and homeschools, but we will be selecting approximately 700. We are the oldest Governor's School in the entire country. We started in 1963. Next summer will be our 60th. We're going to go with that, even though some are debate with COVID, but we're going to go with next year in 2023. But we are the oldest, and we're looked upon as an exemplar of Governor's schools across the country. It is designed for incredibly bright and talented students in various disciplines. We have 10 disciplines across our spectrum, and the idea is that we're bringing students together for a diverse and innovative learning community for the time that they are there, where we focus on the true essence of learning about yourself and about others and the community that we live in for the sake of learning. We do have two sites. We have Governor's School East, which has been with Meredith College since 2000. And then today, we get to introduce to you our new Governor's School site. We are absolutely thrilled to share with you the new Governor's School site for the West. Will be, Deanna, if you don't mind, 2 clicks, I think. Oh, there it is. Winston-Salem State University. We are absolutely thrilled, 1, to get back to Winston-Salem, where Governor's School began, but 2, to be at our first public university. So without further ado, we do have Chancellor Robinson and Dr. Graham with us, who would like to say a few words. Chancellor Robinson.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
It is indeed a great morning to talk about this tremendous partnership with the Governor's School. When we think about the crown jewels of this state, we certainly think about the Governor's School. That's what education is all about. But to be able to partner with the first public institution is important. And not only that, to be able to partner with the first public HBCU is even more powerful. If you think about Winston-Salem State University, founded in 1892 for recently enslaved individuals, today one of the great universities in this state and one of the great universities in this country, where we provide a first-class education to every single student that comes to the university. To have the Governor's School West at Winston-Salem State is historic. But, as you just heard, to return to its roots, 1963, business folks put up capital to be able to start this crown jewel here in North Carolina. But Winston-Salem, the city of arts and innovation, you and this program would have an opportunity not only to be housed at this great university, but to be in Winston-Salem, just a few blocks from our UNC School of Arts. I mean, think about that. This is what this is all about. This is truly historic. We're proud, we're honored, We look forward to having continued partnerships with this Governor School West. We want to be a difference maker. We hope that we can, being the fact that we're here, continue to diversify this program, create opportunities for those who did not have opportunities to be in these kinds of programs. We just started our new strategic plan at Winston-Salem State University, and it says that we're going to unleash the genius in every single student that comes. And so we'll be unleashing genius in all of our students on campus. The Governor's School, the students who come to Winston-Salem this summer will be in the midst of just a great, great learning experience, but a great community around arts and innovation. Get a chance to be the National Black Theater Festival, is there in Winston-Salem in all its magnificence. We're honored to be a partner with this. This is a great moment for the state of North Carolina. Thank you so much.
I just couldn't be more thrilled. It is our goal at Governor's School. As you all know, Governor's School moved over to the Division of Advanced Learning and Gifted Education, is to really build on the foundation of Governor's School, but really grow it for the future. Right now, not only have we secured this incredible partnership, but we are doing a deep review of program logistics and modernizing efforts. We are streamlining and improving the application and selection process. We're updating instructional program to meet today's needs and be reflective of today's context. We're aligning programs across 2 campuses. So students, when they come to Governor's School, no matter what site they are, even though they each have their own incredible strengths, they're experiencing very similar programs. We're updating personal processes and professional development, and we're planning for the future in innovative ways, and we look forward to sharing with you that. And my last great announcement today is we hired just 2 days ago a new coordinator, Rodney Allen, who is our new coordinator of Governor's School. He comes to us graciously from Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Schools, where he taught for 24 years. He is the most qualified person to coordinate Governor's School in the entire state. He has been involved with Governor's School for 34 years, from a student, then a counselor, a teacher, the dean of students, our on-site director, and now here. He is married. He met his wife at Governor's School. Governor's School is in his blood, and I could not be more pleased that we were able to recruit Rodney Allen to come to this, to lead us for the next 60 years of Governor's School. So with Winston-Salem State by our side and Meredith College, we are just super excited for the next 60 years of Governor's School. Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. I'm not sure there's a question to be asked about that. It's just all good news, but if anyone wants to make a comment or take this opportunity. If not, we will move on to action on first read. SLA 1 is the State Board of Education Policy Amendment, English Language Learners Exit Criteria. And this we will hear from Dr. Howard.
Good morning. So this item is in reference to our English learners who follow the extended content standards. Those students also take an English proficiency assessment that is referred to as the alternate access assessment. For the past several years, those students have not had an exit criteria set. So that meant that if they were identified as an English learner, they had to basically stay an English learner. And the reason for that was because of the small population size and the difficulty in doing that in a technical way that could be validated and could be substantiated. So after much conversation internally with our colleagues that service our English learners across the state and their commitment to getting this exit criteria, and then also conversations with our technical advisors that help us with accountability and testing issues, we're presenting to you today to recommend that we establish an exit criteria for this assessment of students who score a P1 or higher for 2 consecutive years with the first of those years being this school year, the 2021-22 school year, and the 22-23 school year, that they would be able to exit the status as an English learner. And of course, with these 2 years of data, we will be in a position at the end of 2023, if it's the same students that are meeting the standard of P1 or higher for those 2 years, then we may come back to you and recommend to only have 1 year. But of course, this population is a population that does not have as much consistency as the general population, and so that is why we are feeling and recommending that 2 years is the optimal rather than 1 year at this time. So with that, I'm available for any questions.
Questions for Dr. Howard? I think we understand. That's a great explanation. Thank you so much, Dr. Howard. We have 2 action items. The first is SLA 2, the North Carolina Standard Course of Study Internal Procedures Manual. I believe this is the 3rd month that Dr. Hempel Joseph has come before us to talk about this, but this is now an action item. And Dr. Hempel Joseph, you want to?
Absolutely. Good morning. Thank you so much, Chairman Davis, as well as esteemed members of the board, State Superintendent Truitt, and all those assembled. We are very excited to elevate the final draft of the Internal Procedures Manual for the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. Within this manual, you will see that when we started this work in August of 2021 at the request of the state superintendent, that the 3 phases of the Internal Standards Procedures Manual have been clearly outlined, and we have included in the board material a chart of SBE changes that not only include a quality assurance review that will happen yearly. This will ensure that all internal key stakeholders as well as external stakeholders have the opportunity to come around each of the content areas and ask necessary questions, as well as dive into the data writing and review process as it relates to those specific content standards. We also are elevating the final templates for consistent and clear, not only surveys, but also live, interactive, and recorded webinars. There are 33 total that not only range from national research, but also state and local research that are going to provide our section chiefs and content teams and consultants a clear path forward. So when we start healthy schools as well as science in the coming months, this will be the first time that we delve into this process to ensure that each of those processes are clear and consistent. We also have baked in internal communication loops. We have received a lot of questions from the field, not only teacher leaders, but also district and school leaders, about what the process is going to be to glean feedback throughout the phases of content writing and standards review. And this is going to be very helpful to ensure that all voices are elevated, empowered, and heard, as well as engaged throughout that process. So if there are particular content areas or specific standards that need to be looked at, we will have an iterative review as well as documentation in order to be able to do that. And then last but not least, we've streamlined and detailed instructions for the data review committees. And this will be tracking the quantitative data, looking across our 8 educational regions to ensure participation, as well as to ensure empowerment for external stakeholders who are deeply tied to the content work. At this time, I'll open it up for questions. And we just want to thank, again, all of the internal departments that have been involved in this process, because it has been a heavy lift to get to this point. And we're very excited because the next phase are going to be the external implementation guide, where we'll be identifying districts and going to them to do site visits as well as reviews to talk about what is needed for consistent implementation and also teaching and learning across our state. We know that some states have more resources and also more human capital in order to unpack standards, to create crosswalks, and to really look at what it's going to look like in terms of implementation in the classroom. So the external implementation guide is going to ensure that everybody is starting at a level 0 when it comes to those standards work and the new content areas that have been developed.
Questions for, yes, Superintendent Truitt.
Not a question, just a comment. Dr. Hempel Joseph, you and Dr. Day and your team have gone well beyond my vision for this work and well beyond the call of duty. I just, with every draft I've seen of this manual, I've just been absolutely blown away by your commitment to detail, your commitment to elevate all voices, and your commitment to ensuring that you fulfilled the task I gave you, which for me was about making sure that our teachers have the best and clearest standards possible. We don't always at DPI get to touch teachers directly. And the least we can do is ensure that when we give them new standards, that they are clear and that we can support them to the best extent that we can in adjusting their lesson plans so that they can begin teaching to those standards. When I was teaching in Johnston County, Common Core standards rolled out. And I have been in the situation where you're just handed standards and expected to pivot. And the more guidance and support we can give teachers when we either give new standards or adjust old standards, the better off our teachers and therefore our students will be. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Other comments or questions? Yes.
Madam Chair, Mr. Ford.
Go ahead, Mr. Ford.
I just had a quick question. Thank you, Dr. Hemphill, for the presentation. Just wanted to know, in the event if we take action on this today, you may have already covered it when discussing the iterative review, but what would be the process for making any updates or changes to this guidance?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. So one of the questions that we've worked with, not only with the field, but also internally, is ensuring that we are not going back to other departments post haste or looking at that iterative review. If we find that there is a standard, a word, or even with revised Bloom's taxonomy, a verb that really needs to be looked at, we have a process that will not only document the comment, but also ensure that we're going back to the template to ensure that that standard at the end will still lead to student mastery and student achievement. We will then elevate that particular standard, not only to state board, but there will have to be consensus with the data, writing, and review team. And then there will also need to be consensus from the board before that particular standard or group of standards will be passed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for the clarity.
Thank you.
Ms. Floyd?
Yes, I just had a question, and again, like Superintendent Truitt said, I really thank you for lifting that up because I too had my student teaching when that pivot happened, and that was a very interesting time in my life when I suddenly had to move from one set of standards to another. So thank you so much for all the hard work that you all doing, and thank you for accepting my questions that I sent ahead of time, and just some thoughts that myself and some of my network of teachers have been thinking about. As we've looked at the manual, one of the things that the manual also talks about, and this might be regular talk for everyone else, but as a newbie, there was the reviewers and the writers. And one of the things that we often have advocated for is making sure that we have the right and the best people in front of the job and lifting up the work. Is there compensation for reviewers? And when we're thinking about the pool of teachers that you might want to pull from, sometimes
Absolutely.
some of the best like to
That is a great question. And we lean into the expertise, the perspective, and backgrounds of all teacher leaders across the state.
Right.
While we do wish we had a more robust pool of resources to be able to give compensation, we not only cover travel and lodging, but we also provide CEU certificates for the number of hours that each of the teacher leaders, school leaders, or district leaders will pour into this work. And again, that'll look different for science versus healthy schools versus ELA, but we wish we could incentivize our teacher leaders more. However, we will compensate them with CEUs and cover their travel as well.
And is that also going to be added or outlined in the manual? Because
Yes.
I might have missed it, but
So the governance board has just followed the rules, the state rules for these surveys. In that letter, it will be outlined what is allowable and what is specific when it comes to that travel and or lodging and the CEUs to wrap up that process at the end of the iterative process of standards writing.
That's excellent. And the other question I had was around how do we also reach out for content experts? If they're, I think about I think about science in
Yes.
general. You know, Ms. Stover, who sits beside me, teaches physics.
Yeah.
I could teach fourth grade science. I don't think necessarily I should be chosen to help make the physics standards,
Yes.
right? And I think being careful about that. Like, we are experts, of course, in the field.
Absolutely.
I do have a license to do this.
Yes.
But I think also we want to be mindful of like how we are picking and choosing which teachers spend the most time like in their field or in that. If you
Absolutely.
wanted fourth grade ELA, I've been doing that all day, every day, right? But I can't necessarily speak on 8th grade English language arts, right? I don't spend a lot of time in that field. So just making sure, is that also included in
Yes.
the, okay.
So there are going to be several measures, not only looking at years of experience, but also looking elementary, middle, and high, alternative, and magnet as well. But also in that recommendation from the district leader or direct supervisor, really codifying and confirming that there's expert level support. We added another tier as well. We will bring external stakeholders together. So we just finished the process 2 years ago for computer science. And so what we found is that bringing those external stakeholders from across the state that are specific and really have some experience with each of the educational regions, we brought them around the table. We said, what are your graduating seniors looking for when you receive them? Are there co-ops and internships or opportunities you've had that have specific proclivities or specific skills that we have not touched on in those standards? So bringing those external stakeholders as well as ensuring that our teacher leaders and rewriters have that content expertise is going to be paramount.
Absolutely. And one last question,
No,
I
you're-
promise. I'm sorry, we're talking about the thing that I have to use, so I have to speak on it. One of the, my other last question was, are the review writers also possibly going to be a part of creating the next manual with the unpacking documents, right? Because one of the things we as educators often, when we see the standard, we like to know where what was the thought process behind it? Like, what are the examples you're looking for? Will they also, the writers will also be
Yes.
unpacking document
Yes.
creators
So
as well?
when we talk about this iterative process, we don't want to leave it open to interpretation.
Right.
So we don't want two schools of thought when we create the how with the why. So we will have an opportunity virtually, of course, or perhaps hybrid if it's going to be safe enough to say after we create crosswalks, unpacking documents, glossaries and things of that nature, to take them back to the originators of it to say, is this in alignment with the intent and mastery of the standards as it was written and voted on?
Thank you so much
No,
for
thank
answering
you
all
for
my
those
questions.
questions.
That was perfect.
Ms. Cammons, just one more thing quickly. Your first question about compensation for these teachers, this is a perfect example of what Pepsi has shared with this board about the way that we could reconsider the way that we compensate teachers. This would be the perfect example of something that would fit into that leadership band in which a teacher could be at the top of the pay scale for the extra work that they are giving to the field. Thank you.
And if I could just be another voice here, you know, I think we've learned, at least for me personally, in my last few years, I've never understood how curriculum got revised, and now I do. And it depends on, we ask so much of the writing of these teams.
Yes.
And they provide it willingly.
Yes.
But we know how busy they are and what teachers try to juggle. And if we could find a way to compensate, that would be wonderful. But I also think, depending on how we move forward with this new vision of licensure, the our CEUs may become much less entwined in that process, and there may be other measures. So that particular benefit may not have as much meaning at some point.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So
Good point.
keep that in mind.
Yep.
All right, if there are no other questions or comments, SLA 3, thank you, Dr. Hempel-Joseph.
Thank you.
SLA 3 is the K-12 revised extended content standards in social studies. Ms. Thomas went through this with us last month, and she, I believe, is here again to walk us through it. I thought I heard that. Are you, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
So, obviously, you're not Ms. Thomas.
I'm not. I'm Matt Hoskins. I'm the Assistant Director of the Exceptional Children's Division. No problem. Good morning, Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, board members, advisors. As we shared at the last state board meeting, with the completion and approval of the K-12 social studies standards by the State Board of Education in February of 2021, the extended content standards must also be aligned with these new standards. Just as a reminder for the board, the extended content standards, as the name implies, are intended to be coherent extensions of those K-12 standards for our students who are most significantly impacted by their disability. By policy, the EC division is required to develop these within 1 calendar year of the newly adopted K-12 standards. I think it's important for this board to know that the EC division did not go alone at the development of these extended content standards. That the process that we used was to get a lot of feedback, formally collecting feedback from about current standards from educators, administrators, parents, students, institutes of higher education, business, industry representation. In addition to that, we also wanted to make sure that our extended content standards were research informed, that they were aligned to current research on not just standards, but the learning and acquisition of those standards, particularly for our learners with the most significant disabilities. Also that they're improvement oriented, that we will want to continue to monitor the implementation of these standards and provide reports to the superintendent and the state board on what we're hearing from the field on their implementation, and that they've been process driven, that this process has been comprehensive in nature in terms of the feedback that we've done in the systematic way in which they've been developed. So based on that and the policy requirements, our recommendation would be, what we would ask is that these standards be approved, state board.
Any questions?
Thanks.
Thank you. Those were our 3 action items that we'll be voting on tomorrow. We will now turn to discussion, of which we have quite a few. SLA 4 is an Every Student Succeeds Act update. Dr. Howard sort of put her toes in the water on this, or our toes in the water last month, and now she's back before us with some specific recommendations that all relate to the lingering effects or the continuing effects of COVID on our testing programs.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz, and good morning. So yes, in the intervening weeks since the last board meeting, we have been drafting the particulars of an addendum for recommendation to the board to approve at its March meeting. We've been gathering input from our stakeholders, and I'll be sharing some of that input as we go through the presentation this morning. So as a reminder, the U.S. Department of Education communicated on December 17th that all accountability and school identification requirements under ESEA are in effect for the 2021-22 school year. However, the department did give states the opportunity to submit an addendum to its ESSA state plan, which is 1-year adjustments for areas of the accountability model where data is not available to meet the requirements due to the impact of COVID. And then states are always have the availability of submitting an amendment to the ESSA state plan. And a state may take both of these actions. So not all of the options in the addendum are relevant to North Carolina. Some of them are and some of them are not. So this morning, our discussion, we're going to go through first the addendum, and I'll be sharing the areas that are applicable to North Carolina. And then we're going to talk about the waiver, and we have an update to the waiver discussion with the U.S. Department of Education. And then we'll be closing out with our recommendation for consideration around proceeding with an amendment. So the first aspect of the addendum is the interim progress toward the long-term goals. So as we'll recall, the ESSA state plan has set a 10-year goal for increase in performance for North Carolina students with interim progress targets. So with the interruption from COVID, with having data available, but also having our students in different instructional situations than they were previously in, we recognize that there has been a shift in the performance data. So on the next slide, we show, and we shared this last month as well, the difference if we look at the 2018-19 achievement data and if we look at the 2020-21 achievement data. And this is the long-term goal, particularly the interim progress for the 2018-19 year and the 2020-21 school year. And you can see for reading 3 through 8 and math 3 through 8 respectively, the difference between the state level performance and the target was -4.2 and -11.2 at the end of the 2018-19 school year. You look in the bottom chart and we can see how this difference has increased for both reading 3 through 8 and math 3 through 8 to -26.9 and -36.6. And likewise, when we look for high schools, we see the same, again, for English and for math. And prior to COVID, the difference was -4.0, and there was actually a positive 1.2 for mathematics. But since COVID, we now are seeing this difference grow to -24.2 and -27.8. So what that means is that schools, because we also determine this at the school level, what this means is that schools will be unlikely to meet those interim targets if we picked up where we would be in the trajectory originally for the 2021-22 school year. So in the addendum, the U.S. Department of Education gave states the latitude to either extend out their interim targets and the long-term goal by 1 year or by 2 years. And we're recommending to extend that by 2 years. So that would mean that the interim targets for this school year would actually be those interim targets that would have been expected in the 2019-20 school year. And then, of course, we would extend out the long-term goal by 2 years beyond the initial year. And the availability to do this is really in 3 areas: the academic achievement that I just shared with you in the charts, the graduation rate, and the progress in achieving English language proficiency for our English learners. Now, the graduation rate is doing pretty well. As we all know, we did not see those same differences in the graduation rates pre-COVID to now. But for consistency and for transparency and for just the clear communication to our stakeholders across the state, we're recommending that we approve this for all 3 of these areas, rather than have 1 or 2 of the areas on one trajectory and another area on a different trajectory. And again, we'll talk more about an amendment toward the end, but this is also an area where we could address going forward more in a long-term way with an amendment. So the addendum also allows that we can have a change for our indicators, and the indicators is where, as a reminder, where the data does not exist to calculate the indicator. Our change is a little bit different. Our change that we're recommending is one that was actually precipitated by the UNC Board of Governors when they changed the UNC minimum admission requirement score on the ACT from 17 to 19. This is a school quality or student success indicator, and of course our state law says that the UNC minimum is what must be used to calculate this college and career readiness expectation in the school performance grades. So for this year, we're putting this in the, recommending to put this in the addendum, and then going forward, of course, we would address this with the amendment. It was brought to my attention this morning that we don't need just the 1 year, we also need going beyond that, and that was a very good catch. In our conversations with the U.S. Department of Education, it did not occur to them and did not occur to us, but we will definitely take care of this for the long-term solution. So just a quick reminder before we go to the next slide, a good way to think about not having data for an indicator, for example, would be growth. Now, growth is the one that we had to ask. We had conversations with Dr. Tomberlin, we had conversations with SAST, and they have assured us that we will be able to calculate school accountability growth this year. Some states calculate their growth differently, and it may mean that they are not able to calculate growth this year. That is not the case for North Carolina. And I just say that to remind us that when you look at the actual addendum, you'll see some blanks where there's little check boxes, and we may ask ourselves, well, why aren't those boxes checked? And the reason they're not checked is because they're not relevant to our situation. The next chart that we see is just the annual meaningful differentiation. This is in a nutshell the school performance grades, and we will have all the data we need to do the school performance grades. Now, the last section under the addendum is the identification of schools, and of course that includes our comprehensive support and improvement schools and our targeted support and improvement schools. Now, in the waiver that North Carolina and all the other states signed last school year, in the 2020-21 school year, we all agreed to identify new schools for comprehensive support and improvement in the fall of 2022 based on the 2021-22 school year. And the department has been very clear that there is no latitude not to do that. What we did have some internal conversations, particularly with our colleagues in federal programs, Dr. Townsend and of course Tina Letchworth, was whether or not to proceed with the exit criteria. It is time to exit schools, and the U.S. Department of Education did give us the latitude to not necessarily exit. However, the feedback that we've had from the field, and Dr. Townsend affirmed, was of course our schools that have the potential to exit most definitely want to exit these statuses. So our recommendation is to proceed with those. So the next three charts get very specific. It is mostly no proposed revision, but there are three that we want to draw your attention to of where we are recommending a revision. And the first one is under the methodology for identifying targeted support and improvement schools for the consistently underperforming subgroups. And this group of schools are identified where they have a subgroup that has a letter grade, a school performance grade of F. And this is for the most recent year and the previous 2 years. And this is almost more of a technical correction just to affirm that those school years are, as you see here, 2017-18, 2018-19, and 2021-22. Of course, skipping those years where we do not have data. The next one is about the exit criteria, and the first one is for the comprehensive support and improvement schools. And one of their exit criteria is meeting that interim progress target on the long-term goals. And we just had the discussion where we know that we are pushing that out, and we know that it's going to be difficult for schools to meet. So we are recommending to remove that for this school year. And again, that is for this school year only. And adding a second exit criteria option, which is a school that is not identified as comprehensive support and improvement low performing in fall 2022, because see, we'll be making new identifications, right? So we've got schools that are already identified, and then we're making new identifications. So if you're not on the new list and you have met or exceeded growth, then you can exit status from that criteria. One important thing to note here is this is an example of where we had feedback from some of our stakeholders. We originally had written this of you had to meet a 1.0 for growth, and the recommendation from the stakeholders was just to do meet or exceeds. And we discussed it and agreed that that was probably the best avenue to go down. So we took their feedback on that. And then the last one in this area is the exit criteria for schools that are receiving additional targeted support. And on this one, we revised the exit criteria to give schools an option, 3 years or 2 years for meeting the growth expectation. And again, this one partly is related to stakeholder input. We at first were recommending and specifying the years as 2018-19 and 2021-22. The original criteria was to use 3 years. We were not thinking we wanted to use 3 years because 2017-18 was the year that got these schools identified. But again, with our stakeholder input, it was recommended that we use 2017-18, and upon further discussion, we decided that was a good way to do this and to use both growth measures and It'd be an or statement, so we give schools the opportunity to either exit this designation either by 3 years or 2 years. So that is all of the information around the addendum. Now we're moving to the waiver, and this is where we have, I think for once I get to say an exciting update, because I never get to say that. So we have been pursuing a waiver, and you will see, of course, in your materials, you have an attached waiver that we drafted. The waiver is out for public comment. We have had ongoing conversations with the U.S. Department of Education. This, of course, is about the issue with, in North Carolina, we have a cohort model for our high schools. We calculate participation for students who have a score by the end of grade 10 in English 2 and by the end of grade 11 in NC Math 1 and NC Math 3. If schools do not meet this 95% expectation, then the difference in what they actually tested versus 95% still goes in the denominator for that achievement calculation on the school performance grade. And so that negatively impacts schools. So we were very concerned about that, particularly given the 2020-21 school year. The U.S. Department of Education in its FAQ acknowledged that students who didn't have the opportunity to test in spring of 2020, that they, of course, would be forgiven. But since tests were not waived by the federal government in 2020-21, then the expectation was that we would still hold those students accountable. And we shared multiple times that the U.S. Department of Education engaged in conversation, and they contacted us early this week and said upon further review, their recommendation is not to pursue the waiver, but to place this in the addendum. And so we will put the rationale in the addendum, and what it will actually state is that the participation for this year will be based on this year, not using that cohort model going back in time, but using the data from this year of students participating in the NC Math 1 and the NC Math 3. So we left the waiver out for public comment, and of course, we are anticipating that when we bring materials back in March, that you will not see the waiver, that we will only have the addendum going forward. And that brings us to the timeline for the addendum and the waiver. And of course, we're now at the February point of time where we're sharing all this information with you. We'll continue to get public feedback, particularly through the public comment process that opened on January 26th, closes on February 24th. That will give us enough time to share any public comments that we have with you at the March meeting. And then, of course, the recommendation there will be for approval. And pending that, we would anticipate submitting to the U.S. Department of Education on March 7th, or no later than. The U.S. Department of Education, of course, reminds us that these addendums will be reviewed in the order that they are received. And so we, of course, want to get to the head of the line because we know our educators, our administrators, particularly as well as all of our other stakeholders, they need to know what is the expectation for this school year. We're already in February, so it's still going to be a late message. So we want to do everything we can to get that information to them as soon as possible. So the last piece is the amendment, and the amendment, of course, again, any state can apply for an amendment at any point in time. We're recommending for North Carolina to begin those discussions mid-spring, going into the summer, and to consider everything we've learned, not just with COVID and where our state is with COVID, which is an important part of the conversation. A good example of that, of course, again, is those long-term goals, but also what we've learned about the ESSA state plan since its implementation, and get feedback from our stakeholders as we have seen how these schools have been identified and how the entrance criteria and the exit criteria has worked, and to see if we can make changes potentially that would further enable us to provide support to the most appropriate schools across the state. So with that, that is everything I have to share, but of course I'm willing to entertain any questions that you may have.
Yes, Ms. Tobin.
So thank you so much for that and all the information you gave us and all the work that you've been doing. Just one quick point of clarification that I wanted to ask. For the exit criteria, now that you need to either meet or exceed growth, as long as the school is at negative 2.0 growth, they would be able to exit. Is that correct?
That is correct, as long as you meet the exit, the meets criteria.
Great,
Yes.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
I have a question.
Oh, Ms. Ashburn, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the information. I had two questions. You spoke about the addendum for the 95% participation waiver for spring of 2021, and you specifically named Math 1 and Math 3. Does it apply for the English 2 and the biology at the high school level?
It does. It most definitely does for English 2, most definitely does for biology, but the impact on the school performance grades does not include biology. It's NC Math 1 and NC Math 3.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then my second question is about the 95% participation rate for this year. So there is an expectation that schools will test 95% this current year?
Yes, that is correct. And what the addendum is doing is it will not hold us to our cohort model.
Uh-huh.
It will just hold us to the test expectation for this school year. So one way to think about it is we know who is enrolled in those courses, and we would expect them to test. And so the 95% will be held to that.
Yes, thank you. And we know, given the absence rates that we're seeing now that are quite significant, so students who do not test this spring, in addition to impacting the school's overall performance grade, those students will not have bank scores and therefore will be expected to test in 2023. Is that correct?
So if you, typically we administer the assessment when a student is enrolled in the course.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would not move it forward. I think where this would come in would be in the amendment. We could possibly look in the amendment to address 2023.
Yes.
I think is what you're asking, because you're going to have some students this year.
Exactly.
So we refer to those as downstream effects. And I'm sure everyone uses that term when it comes to COVID and how that it's going to keep going for years, right?
Yes.
And so we would address that in the amendment. There is no assurance that we would be able to do that, and there's no assurance that if we did it, the U.S. Department of Education would approve it, but we will do our best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Yes.
On that 95%, do you have, what was the number that we did get tested last, for the 2021 year?
North Carolina did very well, and we reminded the U.S. Department of Education of that repeatedly. Ranged, depending on the grade level, the content area, high 80s to close to 95. And now that is statewide. So, the impact from the participation, particularly in the accountability model with school performance grades, is at the school level. So, the state may have really robust, good numbers, but there may be some pockets across the state where the impact of participation is felt more strongly.
Following up then on Ms. Ashburn's comments, what's our expectation or belief in terms of where we can get to percentage-wise this year for the 21-22 school year in light of the issues that are still being confronted by the schools on a daily basis?
Right. So we're just finishing fall testing for the end of course, and the data that I have seen that is preliminary shows that participation is looking very good. We also base that on the communication we get from the field. We have a process, an approval process for students who have to test beyond the state-specified testing window of the last 5 days of the semester. So we know who has to get permission to go 10 days beyond that, and then sometimes in very reserved situations beyond that. And the volume is nowhere near what we had last year. But of course, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that does not mean that there are not schools and situations that are seeing this more, at a higher level than we're seeing at the state level and what we're seeing. But I would say in general, my perception at this point was the fall went much better than I would have anticipated, particularly given Omicron. So, given that, and the schools have just been amazing. I know we all say it, but I must say, and I know that all of you say this much better than I say it, but what they have done in this situation in so many areas is just phenomenal, and particularly with these test administrations, because of course, one of the challenges is we still have some students that are virtual. They have to come in to take the test, and mitigating that with parents, working through that so there's comfort is hugely challenging, I am very sure. So we are very appreciative of all they do.
Quick question. You may have already answered this, so my apologies, but the indicator of school quality, how, or what was the process for us arriving at the ACT score? Because I think, isn't there some flexibility for non-academic indicators, but how do we arrive at the ACT score as the school quality indicator?
So as part of the school performance grade model, how do we arrive at that?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So really that goes back to probably 10 years now, where the first decision point was to have this college career readiness indicator and to use the ACT and work keys. So there were conversations that were internal to DPI that were with stakeholders as well, with the state board, with the General Assembly, and in the beginning of ACT, it was specified in the law, and so it was designated as the assessment. Now, the last go-round, of course, we did have an RFP process for that assessment, and ACT was given that. Okay.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, always.
It's a relief that we're going to get that relief. So, SLA 5, 2020-21 Career and Technical Education Credential Attainment Report.
Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, board members and advisors, and Lieutenant Governor Robinson. I'm very honored to bring to you today for discussion the Career and Technical Education 2020-2021 Credential Attainment Report. And we'll start by looking at 5 data points, a credentials earned by year, and then 4 top 10 lists. The first data point shows, unfortunately, that we did experience a decline in credentials in the past year. And in the detailed report, you'll see that that's attributed to 2 major factors. One is certainly the impact of COVID-19, and directly involved with credentials in many cases is the need for face-to-face interaction and instruction. And then the second major factor impacting credentials this year was the shift from Perkins 4 to Perkins 5, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act. And in that act, we saw a need in North Carolina to realign our pathways to more closely reflect a focused study on specific content. And in doing so, some courses shifted from what we would have considered a major concentrator course to a supplemental level. And in doing so then, of course, there was an impact on the credentials earned in those courses as some enrollments declined in those areas. Next, our top 10 highest earned credentials list shows you individual credential attainment across multiple program areas and which credentials were the top earned credentials. Most of those are aligned and pretty easy to see the alignment to, for instance, CPR and AED to health sciences. But I would like to point out that the CCWR are career and college workplace readiness skills, the Conover credential that's referred to, and there are 8 individual credentials that make the overall certificate that those students earn. And then the last 2, the NCCER, that's the National Center for Construction and Education Research, and those 2 credentials are aligned to our core construction class, which is the entry-level course that students take across multiple disciplines within that particular trade and industry area. Top 10 credentials earned by PSUs with number of credentials earned. We're excited to see 3 of those districts that are indicated with the blue star to have increased credentialing, even despite the shift to Perkins 5 and COVID impact. 3 districts did see an increase in credentialing from the previous year. And then with percent of credentials earned based on CTE enrollment, we see 7 districts who saw an increase based on the percentage of credentials earned based on CTE enrollment. And then the 2 with gold stars were on the previous list and this list. And then top 10 based on credential potential. This is a new metric that we were looking at and focusing on, and it recognizes districts for the number of credentials earned based on how many credentials they could have earned, and we refer to that as the credential potential. The two, Caldwell and Burke County, were represented on all three top 10 lists, so certainly doing an extraordinary job credentialing students. And then lastly, 3 points around regional data. The first being credentials earned by regions across the district, and we see certainly the Southwest earned the highest number of credentials as a region. And then when we look at the regional representation of credentials earned across the regions, we see the Northwest, and that's aligned with the enrollment in those courses. And we see the state represented there as well. 42% of CTE enrolled students earned a credential. And then lastly, the credential potential, and there we have the Northwest earning the highest of their potential to earn credentials across the state. And I'll be happy to answer any questions I might.
I'm glad to see this slide. I was going to apologize for not introducing you properly at the beginning of
That
the
is
presentation.
fine.
You know, one just request that I might make, and I apologize for not making this when we had our committee discussion last week. When you bring this back next month, do you suppose we could have some information on subgroups, student subgroups, and credentials earned?
Certainly.
I think that would be of interest.
Yes, be happy to do that.
Thank you. Yes, Superintendent.
Nancy, thank you so much for this presentation. I love seeing these high numbers of credentials earned, but I want to ask about slide 5. Are we saying that the vast majority of credentials being earned are in CPR and Microsoft Office?
Yes, when you look at just individual numbers of credentials earned, which also aligns in most cases to enrollment. Those are courses with very high enrollments as well.
Okay. So, is it accurate to say that students are, that it would be unusual for a student to receive a credential that is actually aligned to a workforce path at a community college? Does that make sense?
Is it possible for a high school student to earn a credential at a community college?
I'm, in my mind, I'm drawing the conclusion, and I want you to tell me if this is right or wrong. I'm drawing the conclusion that the majority of our students are pursuing credentials that do not have a career path associated with them. For example, children are learning PowerPoint in elementary school, so why are we offering that as a credential in high school?
Right.
And also, I mean, I guess, so go ahead and answer that question first.
Okay. So because the top 10 credentials earned, again, is aligned to courses that have relatively high enrollment, some of those are what we consider when we look across the spectrum of credentials, entry-level type credentials. And there's certainly a benefit there for a student to earn a CPR or a Microsoft Word or PowerPoint just for the social emotional connection, the self-esteem building that I can earn a credential that's recognized by industry. So those are certainly, though, again, what we would consider door opener, more opportunities. And then as we think about that trajectory of credentials, some higher end credentials, like for instance the certified nurse aide credential that students would get. So we think about them as stackable credentials. So a student would get CPR, and then we also look across all courses in CTE and notice that as students progress through the different levels, the enrollment decreases. So we do see fewer numbers there. But in the full report, you can see, for instance, the exact number of certified nurse assistants, as well as other that we would consider at the farther end of the trajectory of credentialing opportunities. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I want to reiterate Ms. Kamnitz's request. I would love to follow up with you all about getting this information by subgroup. And also, I'd like to know I would like to know which schools are offering which credentials, because my fear is that this is already a huge equity issue in our state, that we have some children relegated to taking CPR, while children in other districts are taking stackable IT credentials that could give them a job after graduation. You can't get a job after graduation with a CPR cert.
And you bring another excellent point that from an equity standpoint, the cost has been prohibitive for some of those more stringent, rigorous, recognized credentials as well. And so we're very thankful to the General Assembly for the additional $6.5 million in money to help support credentialing opportunities that was just released last week to districts. So we're very excited about the impact that will have.
Yes, and to your point, there's also a challenge often finding teachers for these roles. And so we need to get creative in how we train up and educate teachers to be able to teach coding, as well as leverage NCVPS or virtual options for districts who don't have the people that they need, especially when it comes to IT credentials.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Devon? So this is kind of a follow-on question to the superintendent's question. The American Institutes for Research has done some substantial work on CTE and how that really can really set students up for college and career readiness. But one of the key points that they highlight in that research is the importance of connecting with industry and business leaders and workforce development as we're building these courses and determining what are the best pathways for kids. And so I'm curious, what kind of work is happening to ensure that we're aligning with what workforce needs, so that as our students graduate with these credentials, which are incredibly important and very impressive, that we're giving them the skills, those durable skills that they need to walk out of a high school classroom and be ready to go into a college program or be ready to go into an apprenticeship or internship that aligns with what they want to do for their post-secondary plans.
Right, excellent question. So we work very hard at the state level to work with the Department of Commerce and Department of Labor, and we work at the districts level. You'll find directors and CTE departments collaborating with their regional workforce development boards, with their local chambers to ascertain that exact thing, what their immediate workforce needs are in their areas. So that work happens to make sure that not only we have the right pathways and courses offered, but also to align the credentials to the courses. So we collect data on statewide credentials, but there are districts across the state that offer local credentials that are aligned specifically to their workforce needs.
Thank you.
Can we get this sort of follows up on some of these other questions? The point of this slide shows that a lot of these wouldn't qualify you for a position, or perhaps would be part of a resume for an entry-level position. There are certifications, for example, I'm going to use one that I know, where you can get certified for HVAC and graduate out of high school and be in a position to have an excellent job opportunity right away. Can we get some slide that shows the HVAC opportunities, the welding opportunities, some of the opportunities that you get the certifications are immediately jobs, in fact, waiting for you to enter into the workforce? Can we get some numbers on those kinds of positions and what our trend is? Are we expanding? Are we not expanding in that area? I think that's really important information.
If I may, a complete breakdown
Yeah.
of every single credential.
Okay, and that's in the full report. I'll be happy to pull that out.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
But I think it would help if you could present it to
Yeah.
us
Yeah.
next time.
I'll be happy to.
It gives us the broader picture that way.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
See, moving on to SLA 6 and SLA 7, which are both State Board of Education policy amendments. SLA 6 is around state graduation requirements, and SLA 7, graduation, certification, and participation for students with disabilities. And I believe Ms. Shaw Coltrane is going to go through both of them with us. Hello again. So I have two. We're first going to start with
We're first going to start with Grad 004, state grad requirements. So here we are cleaning up some things. You know, every now and then I like to do that when we have to open the policy. So one, we added a reminder about the interstate military compact. I meet with several people from districts who have a lot of military families. So they asked that we add that reminder because with that compact, we have to do all we can to help students obtain grad requirements, even if they're not exact duplicates. So we just wanted to put that in there. The second kind of technical thing is we just removed some notes, the word notes, due to some cleaning up. And then the bigger item here is there was a law passed a couple of years ago focusing on arts education. And in that law, it requires that students have one arts education course in grades 6 through 12 for graduation, similar to how we have CPR, right? Speaking of CPR, you have to have CPR to graduate. So we have been working on that in the background. Takes a lot of programming because we don't have. Anyway, there's just a lot in the background that goes with that. So when we back map that, it really starts with the grade 6 students this upcoming year. So we wanted to add that in to the graduation requirements as a reminder, right? So then families and students know, especially for the entering students of grade 9 in 25-26. You should see our chart for this. Now, I do want to reiterate that this will not impact the number of credits required of students because we already have 6 elective credits as requirements as part of the 22. And so students would just, if they did not take it in middle school, they would just need to make sure that they take at least one arts course of those 6 elective requirements. The actual law, I believe I do have in the executive summary if you're interested.
Questions on, yes, question.
Can we get some information on how many high schools in the state now use the traditional 6 course per academic year calendar versus a block schedule of 8 courses? And
Sure.
that's part 1.
Okay.
And part 2 is, and this is not for today, but is there a time when we should be taking a look at as a state board the number of additional requirements that the legislature has initiated in the last few years, make getting all those requirements in a 24 course maximum schedule very difficult, particularly for students who may be trying to put together something that may lead to a career path, or alternatively, students who are trying to put together a resume for college that requires both languages and arts for them, or whatever set of circumstances it may be. I just want us to be, that's, again, not a subject for today, but this subject does really bring it up. We need to be thoughtful about that, and of course, there's the whole issue about whether or not traditional schedule is better than a block schedule, and that's a much debated topic with lots of research.
But we've had a lot more folks bring up that topic because they're realizing when you are on an 8, they're wondering if that is adding significant stress to a lot of students, and not giving necessarily the time needed to help some students who may actually need it. So that conversation is starting more and more in districts, but I will definitely get that information for you.
There are a lot of issues that arise out of it.
Yeah.
But one of the things we need to be cognizant of for our students' sake is when we have the 24 course schedule and the number of different things or pathways that may be open, that creates its own set of stress of trying to be able to get the courses that one needs for the pathway they're interested in. And I think if we continue along this important course, that's a discussion worth having at some point.
Absolutely, be happy to get some of that information for you.
And I don't know that comes under the umbrella of this at the moment. It may be sort of a separate discussion.
I don't think it does. It just occurs.
We can talk about that, about how we want to proceed with that in the committee.
Yes,
okay?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Ford.
Wendell.
Mr. Hall.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Ms. Coltrane, quickly, go back over the CPR requirement. Is that still in for this graduation year?
Yes, sir. We have not, I have not brought to you a waiving of that for this graduating class. For the last two, we have had that waived, and the legislator did support that. But right now, the department feels like there are enough opportunities of in-school that we do not see yet a reason to waive that requirement.
Okay. To your knowledge, do you know if school districts realize that?
That it's a requirement. We are happy to remind them of that.
Please do. Please do.
I will absolutely. And if a school district has done effective planning, a lot of school districts take care of that requirement in 8th grade, actually, with that healthful living standard course of study. And so there are many years that students can have for that. But I will be happy, sir, to make sure to get that out to our chief academic officers across the state.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome, sir.
I suspect that means that Mr. Hall's hearing some things.
Yes, I suspect that as well. I will make sure.
Yes.
So just, sorry, just a question about the 8th grade qualification for that. Not that that would not be fantastic planning, but for adults that have to be certified, oh my goodness, that's wonderful. That's not.
What is it? Fire alarm. It is an actual fire alarm?
Attention,